Let me have your attention for a minute. This is something for the ladies. I'm chilling with the queens of the Stone Age.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to Queens of the Stone Age. My name is Mira Gonzalez. I am your managing editor / host, and I am here today with the lovely 420 lawyers, Michelle and Meital, from Manzuri Law Firm. How are you guys doing?
Doing great.
Thank you. Doing well as well.
Good.
Meital.
See, I knew it right before. I was like, I'm going to do it wrong.
Right before.
Yeah, and then I just fucked it up. See, I haven't even started smoking the blunt yet, and I'm already screwing things up.
No worries.
I'm
it's a
fired.
very difficult name my parents blessed me with.
You know, Mira is not, as far as I know, a very difficult name to pronounce. Like, I get Myra sometimes, but yesterday I was going to get dinner, and then the person who was, like, serving me through the drive-thru was like, ma, and I was like, oh, fuck. Yeah. This dude, I was like, what are you smoking? I want some.
Real good.
So, speaking of smoking, today we are smoking on our wonderful weed from the Green Angels, who are an all-female weed delivery service in Los Angeles.
Cool.
And they're actually recruiting right now, so you can check that out on our Instagram page. We have a little recruitment story to show you where to go. And this is the Blue Dream that we're going to smoke right
favorite.
now. Same. And then we also have, if we're feeling crazy, the Larry Bird, which is like an indica that is so strong that our last guest got too stoned and had to cut the show short.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it was hilarious, but, maybe we'll leave that one for now. We'll save that one for, later tonight. So I just want to talk a little bit about, how you guys, first of all, got into law to begin with, and second of all, specifically into cannabis law. Where did you guys start, and how did you get to the point where, cannabis was really your main focus?
Michelle.
Okay, I'll go first. Well, I went to UCLA and then went to USC Law School. Mm-hmm. I kind of went this traditional path in the beginning. I'm supposed to be a big corporate lawyer.
Mm-hmm. So you went to school for corporate law?
Yeah, that's what I thought everyone was supposed to do.
Okay.
And I started working for a civil firm. Mm-hmm. Hated it. Ended up clerking for a judge in the Court of Appeals, and I got to work on both civil and criminal cases. And then the criminal cases were that is my jam. And so after that, I got internships at criminal law firms, and one of my internships happened to end up with one of the oldest marijuana lawyers here in Los Angeles. And so I was exposed from it since law school. And then after graduation, carried it forward. And that's actually how I ended up meeting Meital as well. We actually met in court.
Okay.
We had
on a particular case? Or
no, she was working for another marijuana law firm, and I was there on another marijuana law firm case, and we just happened to cross paths. And I was like, I like your style. And she's like, I like yours
That's
too.
amazing.
And then it just blossomed from there. But in any case, so my background was mainly working on the criminal defense side for cannabis businesses here in LA.
Okay.
And then we all know Prop 64 happened. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have a niche.
Yeah.
So, a lot of the criminal defense work really involved a lot of how do you operate your business, how to structure your business, it's kind of business law, but in a criminal sense. So it really translated well over when we had to, our clients' needs changed, and so did our practice.
Right. And so was that because before Prop 64, were business owners being charged with criminal charges for owning their businesses, essentially?
Right. A lot of growers, dispensary owners, manufacturers, everyone down the supply chain who are getting licenses now. So a lot of those people who actually caught criminal cases in the past are now getting licensed as we speak.
And is that because there was such a gray area with medical that it was just hard to know what kind of licenses you needed and things like that?
Right. Well, licenses never existed before.
Okay.
So it was just the gray area, the nonprofit collective model, and that is pretty confusing for a lot of people to navigate.
And so that's cash only, and essentially it's on a donation basis, right?
Right. And then memberships, you have to be a patient, and get your paper right, and how to, memorialize all those transactions. So, before I would advise them on how to do all these things so that they don't get rated or charged. And now I we tell them how to do these things so that they can go get licenses and start
Right.
making money for
Right.
once.
Yeah, no, that makes sense
Yeah.
for sure. And so what about you? Did you get started doing corporate law the same way that Michelle did?
I actually started with copyright, but like every job I had was somehow associated with cannabis. The first copyright gig I had was with the Jerry Garcia estate.
Oh, okay.
And then I started working for this firm in San Francisco that did criminal defense. And I walked into the firm and it was like Grateful Dead stuff everywhere. Like it was the most unconventional.
And this
like,
is where you went for the Jerry Garcia
office.
case?
Well, no, this was after Jerry. This was
Okay.
a criminal defense firm.
Okay.
And I started working for them. And then there was a federal case, a criminal case against Ed Rosenthal that was like maybe like 15 years ago. And so I started working on that.
For those who don't know, Ed Rosenthal is a really famous cannabis advocate and writer who just came out with like a really great book that we reviewed. Like
neat. He's a legend.
He's a legend, yeah. More or less.
So he was deputized back then by the city of Oakland to grow for AIDS patients.
Oh.
But then the federal government prosecuted him. So then we were involved in
fucked
the
up.
federal, defense case. So that was like my first sort of parlay into cannabis law. And it was kind of like, I didn't know it at the time that it was like such a huge deal, but it was. And then from there, I actually lived in Amsterdam for a little while
Okay.
and worked in The Hague. And then when I moved to LA, I started working for a firm that did a lot of criminal defense in cannabis as well. And then
And was that like business oriented criminal defense or like personal, like getting caught with bags of weed
it was
type of
no
stuff?
business.
Okay.
Yeah. So like with the Compassionate Use Act, you were allowed to have medical cannabis and you were allowed to grow for other people kind of, but it was all like very vague.
This
and
was
so-
before Prop 64, right?
Yeah, right. So 1996 was the Compassionate Use Act. And so for, 20 years, all of these growers and sellers and the word distributor didn't even exist until like 2 years ago. That was like a completely illegal thing. And so for those guys, we were always trying to like patch this defense together into the Compassionate Use Act, but
The distributors being like the people who bring the weed from the grower to the dispensary.
Correct,
So
yes.
those middlemen were kind of like in a gray area of potentially being.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty much illegal.
Okay.
But we would, have to find recommendations from patients to connect to the cannabis and put this defense together for them. But you would walk into court and the prosecutor would be like, if they're selling weed. And you'd be like, well, here's the
Wow.
medical defense. You'd be like, no, they're drug dealers.
Wow, and they would just ignore the fact that this
Yeah.
medical law passed in 1996. I mean, it's
Yeah.
been legal in California
Yeah.
for so long.
Yeah, and because of the way that the law evolves, it wasn't clear cut, and so it was up for a lot of interpretation. So
I
whatever
see.
the political disposition of the judge or
Right.
the prosecutor, you're kind of stuck with that. And here in LA for a long time, we were kind of in the weeds, so to speak. But then, with time, it got better and better. And then the district attorney's office here in LA and other places just stopped being interested in weed
Right.
cases. But that's pretty recent.
How recent is that? Like last
Like,
couple years?
yeah.
Like, okay, wow. So
Yeah.
that's really with like the Prop 64 push and all of that, that's
Yeah.
kind of like
Yeah.
happening finally.
Yeah.
Right. And so we don't really see as many businesses now being charged with criminal cases. Do we see that happening on a personal level still in Los Angeles? Do you see any like a lot of criminal cases happening for like possessing, say, I know there's like a limit. You can only have an ounce of weed, right? Do you
Yeah.
see a good amount of arrests or do you think that that's really died down?
We see less for sure, but there still are some. They're just not felonies anymore. So what Prop 64 did was it reduced the felony charge to a misdemeanor.
Okay. And that still involves like a court hearing, is that right? And
Yes.
like, does that involve potential jail time?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it could.
But it'd be rare.
Yeah.
Interesting. And so what was like the first case that you guys ever worked on together, or did the firm start before you guys ever worked on a case together?
That's a good question.
That's a great question. Well, I started the firm in 2010.
Okay.
And then Michelle, or no, was that right? Yeah, 2010. And then Michelle and I started working together. I feel like the book, writing our legal weed, our first
right.
legal weed book.
Oh, and what was that? Can you explain that a bit?
We had like so we've written like maybe 7 versions of this book.
Mm-hmm.
And it started with, I think it was called marijuana 101.
Yeah, I think it was Cannabis Law 101. and then
Law 101.
And then there was a 102.
And then there was a 102.
And they were in like binding, like
Yeah,
plastic bindings.
Like a little like laminated.
It was a big,
Wow.
a lot of books.
And so it was just like a literal guide to cannabis law that you guys like typed up and laminated and did like a whole little. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow, incredible.
Because then so I taught for Oaksterdam when it was here in LA, which was back in 2009.
What is Oaksterdam for listeners?
Oaksterdam is like I guess it's like a trade school for cannabis growers, business people, and it was started by a guy in Oakland named Richard Lee, and he was actually behind what was the proposition? 110? Prop 10? I can't remember. It was before Prop 64. It tried to do what Prop 64 did.
But failed?
But failed.
Right. I think I remember that.
Yeah. So he had the school up in Oakland. They still have it up there, and it's really big. And then they established a branch down here in LA. So I was teaching for them for a while. And then when they closed in LA, I started my own kind of seminar type of thing, and we still have them all the time. And so these were the books that we were using in these seminars to teach people. And originally it was just like, I assert my right to remain silent.
Right.
I want to see my lawyer.
Right.
I do not consent to any searches. All that kind of
like
standard.
if you get pulled over and they think you're stoned or something like that.
Yeah.
Right,
or if you have a bunch of weed in the trunk, what are you going to do?
So it's really like personal advice of like how to deal with the police when they're being like aggressive or trying to search you or something like that.
It's quite a bit.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool because it's kind of like a time capsule sometimes.
Yeah.
We're trying to dig up for the old versions and then
Right.
just kind of see, back in 2010, this is the stuff we were scared of. Back in 2012,
Right.
like this was happening, and never would I've guessed like today, like this fast was going to happen though. That one
I think everybody is pretty impressed and excited about like how quickly it is happening.
Yeah.
It does feel pretty fast. And I mean, I can only imagine that like that book is probably going to have like a 105 and a 1025 and
we retitled it.
Yeah, we still putting numbers. We still putting numbers.
Started branding
Now
it
it's
a little
just
bit.
we just changed the name a little bit each time.
Right.
The newest edition. Our last one was
the
legal
newest
weed.
edition.
Yeah, the newest one is
the real new one. Yeah.
But without fail, the minute it goes to print, it's like
outdated.
obsolete.
Right,
So
right.
we're just doing digital now. The book is not worth it.
The laws are going too fast for
Yeah.
traditional publishing. Yeah, for sure. Is this book like available online, like on your site, or?
on Amazon.
I think it's still on Amazon.
Okay.
It's not totally current, though. I would just read our blog.
Right, and that's just basically because the laws are changing so quickly that it's like you could say something was legal last week and it's not necessarily legal this week.
Like 2017, so
Okay.
it's definitely
Yeah.
outdated.
Wow, that's crazy. 2017, I feel like that was so close.
For a while, Michelle couldn't look at the book. She was like, too much has changed, and it's not.
It's not proud of it. Don't look at the book. Don't read it.
Well, I'm sure there are people like in the moment, especially with your seminars, who are like learning things that are, helping them not get arrested and stuff, which will last into 2018, 2019, 2020. So that definitely, has a lasting effect, I think, on people's lives. And so are these seminars things that you guys still do?
Yeah, we're having one December 11th.
At Paragon.
Okay. And where's Paragon?
It's in Hollywood.
Okay.
It's like a co-working space, and it's a cannabis co-working space.
Okay.
And it's got like this cool vibe, and you can find the details out, I think, on our website and our
Okay,
Instagram.
great. Yeah, we'll post that link along with the episode so
Okay.
you guys can check it out because
Yeah,
I'm
thanks.
pretty sure this will be coming out before then.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and so I know like right before we started recording, we were talking about the new permanent regulations for California, which I think by the time you're listening to this episode will have just passed. But I'm interested in what you guys think about them. What do you guys think they're doing well? What do you think that they're getting wrong with the new regulations, or just what do you know so far?
I think for at least in my practice, the big ticket item that gets really a lot of people strongly feeling certain ways about it is there's basically an anti-white labeling kind of provision where brands can no longer license their likeness, their know-how to licensed companies who can then just make the products for them. So they're trying to disallow that altogether. Only the licensed companies can.
So they're trying to make it so that the only companies that can exist or companies that both brand and produce their weed?
Yeah, like for instance, let's use Snoop Dogg.
Right.
Okay, Snoop Dogg, unless Snoop's got his own license under his own name and company.
For growing the weed?
Yeah, for growing. Unless Snoop's growing the weed himself,
Uh-huh.
he wouldn't be able to put out his branded products. Like he wouldn't be able to tell this licensed grower, hey, I want you to grow weed and sell it under my brand
So
name.
you can only sell weed under like your own likeness or the likeness of anybody if that is the person who also grows it.
Basically, they don't want what they're kind of. And by the way, this probably won't even stick because people are so heated
So many
about
people,
it.
like,
I
just
would be
were
shocked
going
if
crazy
it
about
stayed as is. But it's just interesting to see that that's something that they tried to do.
And
like, where
why
that
did they
come from?
try? Like, who's benefiting from this law?
They're saying things like they're worried about not knowing who's actually running the company because a lot of the way these relationships happen is through a licensing agreement.
Okay.
And
Which is confusing because there's license and licensing.
they're
Okay,
like-
so what's
you
the
get
difference?
So you get your license from like the state, right? So your license would be like a type 1 or a type 2 or
Like
a type
to run
3.
a dispensary or
Yeah,
to run
so
a delivery
operating,
service.
Yeah, so
okay.
type 10 is a retail dispensary.
Okay,
you know,
right.
Then there's cultivation, there's manufacturing. It's the type
Right.
6
So like
and a type
retail
7.
licenses.
So yeah, all
plant
these-
touching companies.
Right.
Yeah, plant touches. So you have to get a specific license both from the city and from the state. So that's
Okay.
one type of license. But whenever you have like intellectual property, you know, whether it's a likeness or like branding, then you can also do a licensing agreement, which means that we would contract for my likeness to be on your lovely product, and maybe your product would sell more, and so I would get like a royalty or some other
Right.
kind of agreement.
Okay. And so that doesn't have to do with like a license from the state that says you can legally sell. Rather, it's a license to use somebody's likeness to sell a product.
Right.
Okay. Got it.
Right, likeness or other kinds of IP, whatever it is, their brand or
Right.
whatever.
Or they're right. Okay. So just any intellectual property that is
right.
like, got it.
And they're saying like it's like a control issue, like that, you know, essentially is like a workaround for a lot of these companies that don't have licenses. They kind of, you know, were trying that if you don't have a license from the state, then they were trying to kind of like Mickey Mouse the situation by having their branding done.
Right.
But I think they're talking about it's like a control and a
Right.
regulation.
Because then does that like limit, and like I don't know if this is correct or not, but doesn't that essentially limit the people who are able to create any kind of weed brand? They're limited to the people who also have enough money to produce high quality weed, right? And get the licenses for producing high quality or the whatever those are, the license for producing high quality weed. And that would be somebody who already has like enough money to like hire a lawyer to do that and to grow the weed, right? So is that sort of like what are growers specifically in favor of this, or are they against this as well? Like who?
I think they're against it as well. I mean,
all businesses
they
kinda
want to be
against it.
able to
Right.
use their strong brand equity
Right.
to further their product.
So who is like for that law?
I personally think what their ultimate goal is, you can just very clearly see they really just want to know who is involved
Right.
with cannabis. You know, not just the licensees. They know how
They wanna know
business
their names
works.
and
they want to
their-
know everyone that's involved with the business, and I think it's a
Control thing. Right. Like is that like maybe part and parcel with like the blocking of Canadian weed employees at the border, kind of trying to control who is and is not able to like do this, basically. Like, I mean, and is that a real thing? Is that like a myth that Canadian weed employees are being blocked at the border?
So the federal government. So the ones that are kind of regulating the state would be the state government, and there's 3 agencies. There's the BCC, the Bureau of Cannabis Control, the CalCanna is for agriculture and for cultivation, and then Department of Health is for manufacturing. That's all state level agencies.
Right.
So the federal government at this time they could theoretically try and come into California or other legal states and intervene, but it's very difficult for many reasons. There's an amendment that prevents them from doing so. It's called the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, but also just from a practical standpoint, especially coming up against California, it would be very difficult because the state is in favor of the program, and so it'd be like a battle of governments.
Right.
But what the federal government can do is they can exercise their muscle in other places. So like at the border.
Okay.
Right? So they have control of what's happening at the border. borders. And what we've seen is that Canadian executives or investors in cannabis, because we know in Canada everything's kind of booming from an investment perspective, if they get somehow stopped at the border and it becomes revealed in some way that they're involved in a cannabis company, they've kept them out from entering the United States.
And is that a permanent ban or is that a temporary ban? Like just you can't come in right now?
I don't know. I'm not sure about that one.
They're blocked from entry at that point, and they're put on some list somewhere.
So they'll be flagged next time they try to come into the States. Wow. And so it's kind of just like the federal government essentially knowing that they've already lost and that the toothpaste is out of the tube, as one of you said.
And it worked reverse, like even here too, because there's a lot of, non-U.S. citizens who work in the industry, and they can't disclose
that they work in the industry,
right, for all their like visa or green card application stuff, and they have to be like honest,
right?
And so they're just kind of stuck in this weird limbo.
Yeah,
either get out of the industry or like they just. I haven't seen anyone really leave yet, but that's something that...
Yeah. I mean, that, right, because, in California, it's very easy for, at least me, like, I'm from here, it's easy for me to think, like, oh, weed, that's just legal and easy and no problem. But, that's easy for me to say being somebody who was born in California. Like, that's, if you have a green card, if you're an immigrant or whatnot, I think there's a lot of space for those people in the weed industry and a lot of acceptance for, like, people who have all kinds of different backgrounds in the industry, but not a ton of protection at the federal level. I think one of the main questions that I've had about weed personally, and it's sort of tangential, is just speaking about, flying specifically and going to different countries with weed. There was an announcement that was made by LAX Airport a couple of weeks ago saying that you are allowed to bring weed into the airport or even on the plane. My understanding is that's not exactly true. We talked about this a bit before. Do you guys want to sort of explain what your take on that is?
Yeah, so what they really announced was, here, how's it work? There's the TSA, federal TSA, working at the airports, obviously, and then there's LAPD. That's the local police.
Right.
What they basically said is, LAPD said is that they wouldn't do anything. They wouldn't arrest anybody for their weed at LAX.
Right, because they're LA police. It's legal. Right.
But whether TSA, what happens if someone's caught with marijuana, TSA will get it and will refer it to like local police, and then local police, which is LAPD, is not going to do anything about it. So maybe you'll like miss a flight or something.
Right.
And you'll have your cannabis confiscated.
Right. Like they're not going to let you fly with it. I think that was maybe the main confusion is people thought that because you could bring it into LAX and not get arrested, that meant that you could literally just take it on a plane and fly wherever you want with it.
Right.
Yeah. The statement that TSA released or that LAX released was very misleading because it said something about traveling or going through the airport with it. And so a lot of people thought, sweet, awesome.
Once you're on the airport, they don't check, right?
Yeah. We're like, whoa.
Yeah.
First of all, you're getting checked by TSA, which is a federal agency. Second of all, you're going into the air, which is federal territory.
Right.
Third of all, you might be landing in a state where it's not legal. So for all of those
it's like a
reasons,
multitude of issues.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ignore.
Right. I mean, in all fairness, probably if you bring a small jar of weed, TSA is not looking for that. They're probably looking for bigger things.
And they've said that. Yeah.
I think that's a pretty common thing.
That is that's not what they're looking for.
Right. And so there's like a lot of seemingly misinformation about weed laws in the sense that, we're not going federally legal here. In Canada, they just went federally legal. And so at least the regulations are going to apply to kind of everybody. But here in California, it can feel like it's its own little area. Like it's its own. Exactly. And so do you think that with the permanent regulations that are coming up, do you think that they're going to make everything a lot more clear and make it easier for you guys to do your jobs, easier for businesses? Or do you think that they're not doing that? No, never.
Never. I think they said that in 2019 we can expect 70 new pieces of legislation in California on cannabis. Yeah. So it's constantly changing at the state level. It's constantly changing at the local level. It's every once in a while changing at the federal level, depending on what's happening with Trump or the AG that day.
Right.
So
CBD was reclassified, right? That's
sometimes look at one of those.
CBD got sort of a
they
green
just
light
throw
from
you
the
one,
feds,
right?
and then a red light from the state, and now CBD is like more illegal than THC. I mean, it's just wild.
What is the deal with CBD then? Because that's one that like really fucking confuses me. Like I hear so much about
It
it.
confuses everybody. It's
Because
hard.
with
It's confusing.
Right.
It's very confusing.
Because with Epidiolex, I don't know if I pronounced
Yeah.
that correctly, but that is like now they're having to reclassify it, right? Because they're making a medication out of it.
Yeah.
So is that going to make it so that it is literally legal, or is it still
That
like
specific medication. We wrote an article. We write tons of articles.
Okay.
Everybody can go to our website
Great.
and go to the articles link. But on a Pedialex specifically, they classified that CBD as to Schedule 5, and it was because it had less than, I think it was like 0.01 THC.
Okay.
Or something like
so
that.
like trace amounts of THC?
Yeah, trace amounts of THC, and they passed that one, and I'm sure there was some political, like, John Boehner
Maneuvering,
or
yeah.
whoever was behind that, because it was very narrow and specific for just that drug.
I see.
It's still a good thing.
Right. It's a step in the right direction, but
yeah.
it's not like overall. So like if I say had marijuana-based CBD in my purse and I drove through Wisconsin and I got caught with it, I would still be in trouble.
You
right?
could be.
Like,
Yeah, you could be at the whatever the Wisconsin law is.
I mean, that was an
which
example. I'm
after
not really sure what it
watching
is.
Making a Murderer, stay away from Wisconsin. You do not go into
At all costs, right? Just avoid that state. I think I'm using the example of Wisconsin specifically. I feel like somebody did get caught with CBD in Wisconsin and go to jail. That might not be right, but I feel like that's why I'm thinking of that example because like I read a crazy fucking story.
Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah, no, it's a fucking nightmare. It's like crazy.
Yeah. Well, we all know CBD is either like hemp derived or cannabis derived.
And so is there a difference in legality between those two?
Yes. And what's crazy is that at the federal level, the hemp derived is legal, but at the state level, it's illegal.
Yeah.
So wait, hemp is legal federally, but on state by state, it's
Hemp
illegal?
is not legal. Okay,
It's
we got
very-
Or
another
hemp-derived
article.
CBD, rather?
The great hemp conundrum.
So just to be clear, hemp CBD and marijuana CBD, the difference being that hemp is a plant that's grown without THC generally for industrial purposes, for fabrics and stuff like that, that does have CBD and trace amounts of other cannabinoids. You can extract CBD from that plant. Alternatively, you can extract CBD from a marijuana plant that does have THC in it. You can get rid of the THC, and you can include several other cannabinoids that are not THC. So it's like a pretty minor difference between these two things, just for people who don't know.
Yeah.
And so there's a difference in law federally for hemp-derived CBD versus the state level.
Yeah, but what's interesting is it's still you can't grow the hemp federally necessarily in the United States, so you're getting the hemp stalks from overseas. So
Okay.
They're shipping them from Eastern Europe or China and deriving the CBD from that.
I see. And so the hemp farming bill, I think it's called, is that potentially going to change that? Is that the aim?
Right,
So that it would be legal for anybody to farm hemp.
I don't know if anybody.
No, it's going to be kind of like a mini licensing.
Okay.
Kind of certain very few are going to be able to start growing. But the whole hemp the whole CBD thing, it really just gets chopped up into two. Do you have like THC? Are you like THC or are you less than, I think it's what, 0.03% THC?
Okay.
And that's the threshold. Because all hemp and cannabis, they all have like trace amounts.
Right,
They're all,
tiny
like-
bits. Yeah.
So 0.03% is the threshold. And then
Okay.
so that's one issue.
Right.
And then the other issue is like, where did it come from? Who grew it? And then how did it get here?
So it's just
you
like
know?
unbelievably complicated and impossible to regulate, basically.
And then like CBD can't be used in like food products and like
California.
supplements by the FDA.
I see.
So there's all these like
So is that the kind of thing where like is California introducing any legislation involving like hemp specifically? Like could California say, actually, we're okay with you infusing CBD into food and like that doesn't matter? Or is that like federally mandated and
The
they
Department of Health actually specifically came out against infusing CBD in anything ingestible. So it's crazy because you see CBD everywhere.
Right.
Most of it is like not okay because
Right.
if you're ingesting, and it's like they changed it overnight and out of the blue. So like nobody knows. There's a place
So like no one knows whether
Near
it's
us,
legal
I
or
won't
not.
call it out, but it's like a big sign
big
that says
place.
CBD pizza. And we're just like,
Pizza? That's a lot. That's
Yeah,
a lot.
there's CBD cocktails.
I've
Like,
seen the
that's everywhere.
cocktails. Yeah, the pizza seems like why pizza, right? Like that doesn't like lend itself to the pizza. I feel it's like
Yeah, there's. I think it's because no one's really been strongly enforced. So
right.
And there's also a challenge, from what I hear, I'm not a scientist, that there's a challenge in, like, let's say you take it, it's hard for them to figure out
where it came from.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And
so they can't really, like,
they don't know what's in it.
Yeah, they can't prove that it came from XYZ in order to make it legal.
Right. And
Yeah.
I think the labs in California, there's very few. Maybe you guys like know better than I do even, but we did an article recently about how the methods between all the different labs are different and have different results. So even when you do get your weed tested to see exactly what's inside of it, if you got it tested in another lab, you would get a different result. So nobody really knows what's in it at all. You know, the reality is all you can do is like make sure no one uses poisonous pesticides and like hope for the best, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, before licensing, and I don't know if this is still going on, there was a rumor that if you paid the lab extra, you might get preferential treatment on
Wow.
your labeling. I don't know if that's happening anymore. I think last time I checked, there was about 40 labs licensed in all of California.
Okay.
It might be more now.
Yeah.
We represent the first licensed lab in LA.
Really?
Yeah, and I know that they, have state of the art equipment and all that kind of stuff. But they've told me about other facilities that are, barely certified or
Right.
not certified or.
And is that because like the certification process is just not fleshed out enough? Like it just doesn't.
Not really.
It's just like not complete. They're not like.
It's not that hard. I mean, I don't know how hard it is, but it's if you really want to. I mean, it's not. You just have to follow the steps that they
Right.
require to get certified. I think it's just the people in this space. We have to remember aren't used to regulation or rules.
Right.
Right. They've been
Doing
hiding
it illegally.
in the shadows, or in the gray area for a very long time, and have been purposely not keeping records and purposely hiding what they're doing.
Right.
And so there's a lot of mistrust. Like
I'm just going to keep hiding it. Why would I get permits now? I've been doing it for so long. Right.
Right. And also, like, what is the government going to do with this information?
Right.
I've been doing this illegally for 20 years. Does that mean
Right.
I'm going to have to pay taxes for the past 20 years?
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that what happens if the federal government subpoenas my information from the state?
And are those justified fears, you think? Like, is that like.
I think the
genuine-
tax issue is justified.
Yeah.
I think, a lot of these guys now, if you apply for a license, your address, name, phone number, and email is on a website.
Right.
And so these guys are getting calls from insurance brokers, from all kinds of predatory consultants, whatever this, and it's like scary,
Yeah.
You've been hiding for 20 years and now your phone number is plastered on a website somewhere.
Right. That totally makes sense. Like if you've been doing like, something that you knew was illegal and that could get you in trouble for all that time. And now suddenly you're supposed to just like post publicly the fact like, hey, I grow weed. I sell weed. It's like
Right.
it feels crazy.
Right.
you know?
And because of the banking issue, you can't, you have tons of cash potentially, or
Right.
at least are thought to have tons
Right. And
of
that's
cash.
because the banks won't touch any company that touches the flower, basically, right? Like they
Right.
have to operate in an all cash business.
Right.
And so for tax purposes, that's probably pretty crazy, huh?
Yeah, I mean, they have to make appointments with the different tax agencies to go pay $50,000, $70,000, $100,000 in cash that they might just be like carting around in their backpack,
Right.
And so now that their address is plastered everywhere, they're
They're
ripe for robbery.
vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
Right. Terrible. I mean, yeah, I could talk about taxes and public banking in the weed industry like literally all day long, to the point of like making listeners fall asleep. So we could save that maybe for a special episode where we just talk about that. And only the boring people
the
can.
special interest.
Yeah, exactly. But so we did actually solicit a couple of questions for you guys from our Instagram followers that made legal questions about weed that maybe you guys could answer. And so I'm sure you guys get questions like this like constantly. Sorry if it's annoying, but
Not
so
annoying.
the first question we have, which is honestly one that I have too, is what to do if you get pulled over while you're driving while stoned. What are the laws? How do you react to the police officer? Like, what do you recommend your clients in that situation?
Well, first, we would recommend not driving stoned.
Okay, yes.
Number one.
Number one, for sure.
Number two, if you are going to carry cannabis in your vehicle, it should be in a sealed container in your trunk, out of reach. This has been the rule for forever. So don't have it visible or smellable.
Right. Don't put it in your cup holder. Don't leave roaches and wherever.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. If you're smoking while driving, so if you're like visibly with the joint or a vape pen in your mouth and a police officer sees you, that's going to make the case against you much stronger.
Right.
So that's something to be mindful of.
So, like, say I got pulled over and I did have a joint in my hand. Would it be better for me to throw it out the window? Or should I just put it out and put it in the cup holder and hope for the best?
If you throw it out the window, there's another law that you're
okay,
violating.
I thought so.
And it's not just littering, but specifically throwing a butt out the window is like 8 hours of community service. You don't want that.
Wow, I did not know that. I had no idea. That's really good information.
So don't throw butts out your window.
Okay, got
you don't
it.
want to do 8 hours of community service.
Definitely not.
And
So the cop pulls you over. Let's say you're not smoking weed. Let's say you're just stoned, right?
or it smells in the car because you just smoked or
yeah.
whatever.
So then the cop comes up to your window. What do you recommend from there?
Well, if he's gonna ask if you smoked, you would tell them no.
Yeah.
Or I don't.
I
assert my right to remain silent.
Yeah.
You don't want to lie
Yeah.
to the officer. You don't want to, but you do have a right under the Fifth Amendment to remain silent.
And you have to
say
say that
Right.
in order to assert it.
Right. So it's the Fifth Amendment. Like, I'm asserting my right to remain silent.
Say, thank you, officer, for your duties. I assert my right to remain silent.
Yeah, that's from a young age. The main piece of advice that my father gave me was don't talk to cops. You don't have to talk to cops. Never talk to them.
Yes,
So that makes
exactly.
sense. So you assert your right to
Another
remain
making
silent.
a murderer last
Yeah, right. Exactly. I listen to a lot of true crime. I'm always like, if they tried to get me in a false confession, like I would know what to do. Like I got this. Like,
Exactly.
so then, are the cops in California or like Los Angeles specifically, do they give you some sort of test to see if you're stoned? Is there like a weed breathalyzer type of thing? I remember they were shopping a new device.
Well, there's always the blood test, and we could talk about that in a little bit. And
Okay.
then what they're trying to kind of roll out in some counties is like a breathalyzer version, but like a buccal test, like a swab cheek,
Okay.
in your cheek. But that hasn't been tested in court yet, so as sound scientific evidence.
Right.
But that's just kind of something they're working on. But for blood, if you test positive THC in your blood, which you, by the way, could possibly do for like months, I think 2 months or something.
I think it's
blood.
3, yeah.
3 months. It stays in your blood for a
Yeah.
long time. So if you had smoked 3 months ago, you could test positive and they can accuse you of DUI.
Right.
But that's also why it's a lot easier to defend a cannabis case because
Because of that information.
It's not like alcohol where you have
Right.
0.08%.
And then the next day you're totally 0%.
Yeah, there's no magical number.
Right.
And so here the blood test on the alcohol will tell you when you drank alcohol too.
Right. But it's not the same for THC.
It's not the
It's
same
a
for
totally
THC.
different thing.
And the prosecution has to prove that
Right.
you were under the influence and it affected your driving.
So then is it like relatively uncommon for these cases to be like pursued even? Like for people to get these tests on the side of the road or be taken to the sheriff's station for a blood test?
I've seen a few, I've seen a lot of them don't end up getting filed. Like
Okay.
they'll get their ticket and then nothing will
Nothing
ever
happens
be
at
charged.
court, right?
But
The thing is when you so the alcohol, it gets absorbed into your system, and then they take a breath test, and that, breath test will indicate your blood alcohol content, and whether you take the breath test on the side of the road or you say, no, I don't want to take it on the side of the road because you don't have to,
Right.
or you take it at the station, it's generally within about an hour, and the alcohol, if you're over 0.10, is probably still in your blood. Cannabis, on the other hand, there's active levels of THC and inactive levels, and I think it's like nanograms is inactive. And so if you're a habitual smoker, you probably always have at least 0.05 nanograms in your blood.
But the active would be like if you had smoked in the past couple days?
No, it would be... So that's the thing. It could be like in the past hour.
Oh, okay.
So if you smoked, let's say, an hour before you got in the car, then you got in the car and you're kind of coming down from your buzz. By the time they got you to the blood... because they have to take you to a nurse's station or a hospital to take your blood.
I see.
And so several hours arguably could have already passed, and so
you won't have the active levels in there anymore.
You won't have the active levels in there.
See.
So just not making any statements is key. Not having, we have guys who have the bong and then in the center console, and then the cop touches it and it's still warm,
Right. Just be smart about it.
Yeah. So as long as it's not visible, and you control for smell, you don't make any statements.
Right.
And
don't talk to the cop.
There are a lot of people that admit to cops.
Yeah.
A lot of people they'll just or they'll say I smoked 6 hours ago, and it's why are you saying that? Just don't say anything.
I've heard a lot of advice if you're just honest with them, they'll be nice.
No,
don't say anything to the cops.
That's
never
the worst
talk
piece
to
of
them.
advice.
Absolutely. Don't talk to the cops. So don't take any roadside tests. Don't say anything. Assert your right to remain silent.
Right.
Basically, and then contact
the
you
roadside
guys.
test won't really work against you if you haven't been drinking.
Right.
So if you take a breath test and you blow it 0.00 because you haven't been drinking, that could probably help.
And there is no roadside THC test really, besides maybe this cheek swab thing, which you can refuse.
Yeah. Everything on the road you can refuse.
Right. It's just once you get to the station.
Once you get to the station,
that makes
breath
sense.
or blood.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
If you refuse that, then you really limit whatever case they have against you.
Right.
But the DMV won't care, though. If you refuse the one at the station, you'll have your license suspended for a year.
Okay. So at the station, you probably should take it because otherwise you won't get to drive for a year, depending on what you're
Yeah.
Or you should just Uber for a year.
I would say it's a case by case.
I do Uber for a year.
Yeah. Fair. All right. So our next question is... and this is definitely one that interests me as well. So people who use weed medically in California, there's, state medical licenses for weed. And then I believe city, just doctors' recommendations for medical weed that you can have in California. But people who have those things are still often tested for drugs at their work. And so are there any protections in place for people who use weed medically for a condition if they are drug tested to be able to say this is a prescribed medication?
Not really.
No, it sucks.
None.
Yeah, the employers have the right to place these conditions on of employment.
Really?
Yeah.
And why is that? Because
It's the right to contract. It's the private business's right to contract. So, for example, if you're a truck driver and you have a recommendation for medical cannabis, the fear might be that you might drive impaired, even though it's medical.
Right.
Similarly, you can have a zero tolerance policy for any.
But if you were
substance.
prescribed, say, Xanax, right? Would they legally be allowed to bar you from being a truck driver if you were prescribed Xanax and it was in your bloodstream, but you weren't doing it during work hours?
Yeah.
They
it would
can,
depend on the employee handbook policy.
But that's all. There's no legal protections for anyone's need of medication.
The only legal protection you might have is if it's not because of the Xanax per se, but because they're discriminating against a protected class of people, which medical cannabis users are not. If it was an age discrimination thing because it's blood pressure medication.
Right. Or could it be a anxiety, mental illness discrimination if you
But you could kind of say I don't want mentally impaired people,
and that's
operating.
also allowed.
Kinda.
Yeah.
If it's a teaching position or whatever it is, you have certain responsibilities that might be impaired. So it really depends on the specific policy of the employer. We've been successful in getting certain employees their disability benefits or their unemployment insurance if they are fired.
Right.
It doesn't mean that the firing was necessarily illegal, but if the company contests the unemployment insurance, then sometimes you can win on that.
Okay, I see. And then you can get unemployment for a certain amount of time at least. But the actual firing and hiring of the job is just essentially, if you have a medication that you need to take, otherwise you'll die, then there are some cases in which they'll like make an exception and let you work. But other than that, that's basically
it's up to the employer.
Yeah.
Right. And so do you think for something like Epidiolex, like the CBD seizure medication, like there will also be an exception for that?
Well, that's for kids mostly.
Is it really? It's only for kids?
It's
I didn't know that.
Pediatric like medication for like seizures in children.
I see.
We're okay with that one.
Never mind then. We don't have child labor in California, that's for sure.
But the the sort of theory that you're asking is like, what if it's a federally legal?
Right.
Which a lot of other medications are, right? Like Vicodin,
Right.
like Xanax.
But they can still not hire you if you take them.
they don't have to accept someone who's on any kind of medication.
Right. All right. And so our last question is about permits for public smoking events. I know that in California there's been a lot of events like, yearly weed events that have to be canceled because, first of all, vendors can't sell their weed and people are not allowed to smoke at a public event.
It's wild.
And so what will that be changed with the permanent regulations? Is that being changed now? What's the deal with that? And why are people unable to get these permits that they're supposed to be able to get?
Yeah.
For the consumption aspect of it, okay, so the consumption aspect, it's just, one, it's smoking in public is just illegal. Period. Like smoking cigarettes, I think, is public illegal, period.
Really?
Well, not like on the street.
Yeah, like you can't just you can't walk into a restaurant and
Right.
start smoking a cigarette or a hotel lobby.
Right. So it has to be outdoors.
Yeah, it has to be outdoors and like designated smoking areas.
Right. But even for outdoor events, there's still an issue with like smoking at an event. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's hard because that's the theme. It's like you're not just dealing with the state, you're dealing with the local city in which the event is operating, and so sometimes you'll get some problems on that end, like consulting with your local law enforcement. And, they won't allow it,
right? And so a lot of the permitting issues,
it gets a little hazy,
right?
For these cops, I think, to determine what is
what's illegal and what's permitted.
So we in turn are like, is this okay? Is this okay? And so that's kind of how it's been going. But in any case, the newest development for at least events is that they've, before also, you could only hold events at like agricultural districts or like county fairgrounds, so it really limited the number of venues
Publicly,
that you
like certain owned properties by the municipality or the state were the only places you could have.
There's not that many to choose from.
I see. Yeah. And then you'd have to go through like the local government to be able to use that property because it belongs to them, right?
Well, now they changed that.
Okay.
Yeah, to now allow you to operate at a venue so long as your local allows you to operate at the venue.
Okay.
So event licenses are kind of weird.
At any venue. It doesn't have to be like owned by the local government, right?
The locals just have to.
But what's wild is like when it comes to selling at an event.
Yeah.
Right. So what's the deal with those permits?
That they can't.
Like they just don't exist?
I forgot what bill number it was.
Yeah. You essentially have to have a retailer license.
Yeah, in order to sell.
So like that's like a dispensary license.
Yeah. So a grower who just has a cultivation license couldn't go.
Or a brand who's getting weed from a
farmer's
grower.
market model would not be.
So only
allowed.
dispensaries would be allowed to do that. And then is there still regulations on dispensaries being able to sell at public events like that in terms of like it being in public and not like in a dispensary that has a waiting room and stuff?
Well, it wouldn't be a dispensary because they don't have a storefront there.
Right.
The dispensary, and that's a storefront. So, but a delivery could arguably come there, and so.
Right, because technically they're delivering to the
Exactly.
party if they had like a booth there or whatever that is.
Right.
But if you were like a dispensary, like if you were MedMen, you couldn't have like a booth at an event and sell weed at that booth.
Yeah, because that's outside your premises.
So the only people who can sell weed at events right now basically are delivery people. And even with them, are there like some...
You would have like a booth with like a online ordering pad, and you would then be ordering from the delivery, and then someone would come up and be like, "Oh, you just ordered this." Here.
So you would have to do like a ridiculous thing to make that like work, basically.
But people do it. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So you can just like hand someone cash
can
and
go
buy.
and have things on display.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And can you give it out for free?
No.
No, that nobody can do that.
No, but we see it happen.
But you can gift it to people, right?
Yeah, but
People
not if it's
to
for like
people,
a promotional,
but not
market.
I
licensees.
see.
Yeah.
So like if I were, and we don't sell weed, but if I were to go out and have like Mary Jane weed at an event and hand it out to people, that wouldn't be legal because it has our brand on it?
If you had a license from the BCC or any of the other agencies,
Mm-hmm.
you cannot gift the cannabis
Right.
if it's part of the like promotion.
I see. So what if we were to like hire or just like ask a friend to hand out weed at a party? Like, is that like, are there workarounds that people use for like giving out free weed at parties?
Yeah, what I can say is if you...
Like,
if
I'm not
you walked
advocating
into
it, but-
I'll say this. If you walked into a room and you happen to have, like, a bunch of joints on you,
Uh-huh.
and you walked into a room and you were like, I'm going to give you all gifts.
But you're not an employee
Yeah,
of
right.
Mary
You're not doing it
Jane
because
or
of
an
work.
agent
Of the company
of
who
the
made the
company.
weed.
You're just like my friend and you're like,
Right.
hey, I just bought all this dope weed. You want some? I'd be like, yes.
I see. So it would have to like, I would have purchased it and me like handing it out to you guys because I'm just generous and
Yeah.
kind. Right. Got it. All right. Well, I think that's our last question.
confuse you
I'm just glad that I didn't make you guys go on and on about taxes and public banking because I was this close. Like I was so close. I
next
felt it
time.
coming out of me. Next time. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. We will have all of your links to the book and the seminar on your website and your Instagram accounts. Those will be all up with the podcast, so you guys can check that out. And thank you again to the Green Angels for their lovely weed.
Thank you, ladies.
Thanks, ladies.
Bye.
Bye.
I'm chilling with the queens of the Stone Age.